Welcome to the Red Chip Poker Podcast, where we share stories and strategies from the game's most fascinating minds. No matter where you are in your poker journey, there's always something new to learn. So let's get right into today's conversation with your host, Robbie Straczynski.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Red Chip Poker Podcast. I'm Robbie Straczynski, and I am excited today. Why? Because I have the pleasure of speaking to poker broadcaster extraordinaire, David Tuchman. If you've watched any televised poker over the last decade and a half, I imagine that you've been exposed to David's excellent work, but he is a man who wears many hats in the poker world. On today's episode, we're going to learn all about him, his career, and maybe even get some interesting poker tips along the way. David, welcome to the show.
Great to be here. And I like that, by the way. You sounded like, you actually sounded like my dad's rabbi from Brooklyn.
Oh, man.
That was, I mean, honestly, like 100% spot on. I thought for a second, I was like, I'm back in Brooklyn. Hey, there you go. Okay, sorry. Continue.
Goodness, great. Well, this is not going to be a sermon, and I'm actually from LA, but I've been told that I have a New York tint to my accent. So
it's
thank
not
you.
The accent; it's just it was more of your the manner of which you spoke. It was that kind of the ting to it more than the accent. But nonetheless, it was a compliment. Take it as such.
Thank you. Thank you very much, David. Well, let's just dive right into it. We'll start with question number one, and they're not all numbered, but it is the first one on the sheet here. Is poker something you've been into since your youth, or are you a product of the moneymaker effect?
Oh, no, well before the moneymaker effect. Well before moneymaker was on the scene at all. I was into poker. My first glimmers of poker was from my grandfather who played. And then I remember actually going up to the Concord when I was a little kid. The Concord is basically like Dirty Dancing, Catskills. It was where Jewish New Yorkers went up for New Year's. So I would have a hockey tournament because I played hockey, and my sister and my father were already up there. My mom and I would be playing. I'd be at a hockey tournament, and then right from the hockey tournament, we'd go to the Concord for like a few days of fun and New Year's, right? Anyway, my dad, who was always a gin player, they played poker there, and they played with cash, cash at the table. And it amazed me because, they were playing with like 10s and 20s. So, back then I had no idea what they were playing, but I imagine they were playing 10, 20 limit stud.
Right.
This is many, many, many years ago. And I would sit behind my dad and watch him play. And I'd watch him fold, and I was just mesmerized by it. And my dad gave me, and all the dads would give their kids a roll of quarters. So it was like a $10 roll of quarters, and basically be like, okay, kids, scram, leave me alone. And there was an arcade there. Uh-huh. So we would go use it in the arcade. But I quickly realized, like, hey, wait, I can turn this $10 into more money if I challenge the other kids to poker. So we would get our $10 roll of quarters, and we'd want to emulate our fathers, and we'd go play cards as well. So from a very early age, I was already playing poker for quarters, and it was pretty high stakes considering, we didn't have nickels and dimes. We just didn't have them.
Sure.
So we were right away playing quarters. And so from then I was playing. I remember going on some like ridiculously stupid like teen tour, and I was just playing poker with everybody on the teen tour, making money. So yeah, from a young age, I was a degenerate.
Wow. Good. That's certainly quite the story. And to an extent, maybe not a degenerate, but one that I could identify with. And I imagine maybe some of our listeners as well. I mean, we will be talking plenty about your work in the industry during the second part of today's show. But, since you brought up playing poker, you look at one look at your Hendon Mob, you got over $160,000 in lifetime tournament cashes, twice at the WSOP main event. And, as you've said, and from what I've seen over the years, you've been known to partake in a cash game or two here and there. So which do you prefer, cash games or tournaments?
I mean, cash game is my bread and butter, and that's what I've been doing for the last, 15 years or so, or at this point, 15, 16, 17 years I've been playing cash games. And I am 99.9% cash game player. I love tournaments. I really enjoy the competitive nature of them. The time restraint on tournaments is a little bit more difficult for me.
Mm-hmm.
And had I picked up tournament poker in my early 20s, late teens, when I had more disposable time, maybe that would have been the path I took. But with cash games, you're just it's a lot more flexible.
Right.
You can play for 6 hours. and you can come home. You know, if you need to take a day off, you take a day off. You know, tournaments are it's just difficult tournaments, I think, because of the, you know, the length of the days. Mm-hmm. Although I will do a shout out to Mount Savage when I played the Bay 101, and I'll throw this out there for all tournament directors. We started our day at 10 in the morning and we were done at 6:45 at night.
Wow.
And if other tournaments were like that, you would bring in people like me, you know, people that have young kids and stuff like that, where it's just a lot more, you know, that's a lot more convenient. That's a day of work, basically.
Right.
And I can, you know, it's not a noon till 11 p.m. or noon till midnight type day, which is very hard for me to kind of rationalize to my family and my wife. Mm-hmm. So I love tournaments. I really do. I love the competitive nature of them. I think they're so much fun. And the few that I play, and I just don't get to play very many, I feel like I've done pretty well, you know, through the years. But yeah, I am 99% cash game player.
Right. Well, you mentioned, you know, through the years you have done pretty well. And like I said, you know, I quoted the Hendon Mob. One thing I noticed on all of your results, though, all of the tournament cashes are in Hold'em. But I know you loved mixed games as well. I've played with you in a mixed game, a 4-8 fun mix at Treasure Island back, you know, a couple of years ago, or yeah, last year even. What do you like about mixed games?
I love mixed. I mean, I grew up watching my dad play stud, and you know, as a result, when I first moved to, so growing up, like I didn't play Hold'em. I mean, Hold'em isn't really a thing. So growing up, I would play, you know, around the table home games with my buddies, and it was basically the equivalent of dealer's choice. So we would play games like Follow the Queen and Midnight Baseball and, you know, Chicago and Black Mariah and King Little and whatever game we could just come up with at the time. You know, we'd play Nuts and Guts and all sorts of fun games. But it was so I learned to play poker, not necessarily Hold'em. Mm-hmm. So when Hold'em kind of when I moved to LA and I realized that there was actually poker, like there were casinos here, I was like, you know, I was like a pig in shit. Can I say that here?
You can say that.
Okay, cool. No, but I was so excited. I was like, what? So, you know, I would go down to, you know, I remember venturing down to Commerce the first time. And the first game that I jumped into was a stud game. And then I noticed stud 8 and I was like, well, that looks cool. And I read a kind of quirky little book on it. It was more of, I probably have it in my library here somewhere that I'm looking around that I can't find it. But anyway, I read this quirky little book on stud 8. It was like half strategy, but mostly stories. But I picked up enough on the strategy that I was like, oh, I'm going to play in this game. So I started playing 3-6 stud 8 at Commerce.
Wow.
And so I've always loved stud games, and I love playing different games and fun games. I was just in Montenegro with the Triton Poker Tour, and I got to commentate a ton on short deck. And I think that was fun. So, I mean, there's so many different games that I think it's great. But in terms of tournaments, because I don't play, like I said, I mean, I probably play 5 tournaments a year at most, you know?
Right.
So it's just a matter of,
do you have a favorite variant among all these mixed games?
No, probably stud 8 is my favorite variant of all the mixed games. Mm-hmm. It was the one I played a lot of. Like when I was living in London, I played a lot of stud 8, like shorthanded stud 8 online. I used to play a lot on full tilt. So, you know, I used to battle against like Alan Kessler and Cindy Violette was always in the room and stuff like that. But we'd play like 3-handed, 2-handed, 4-handed, whatever it was. And I love stud 8. But it's just a matter of, most of the smaller tournament series, if I was going to play one, the mixed variants are really kind of small. You're not going to make any money.
Sure.
You know, first place might be like, you know, $1,300. You know what I mean? And the World Series, I have played maybe like a couple of stud 8 events, and that was it. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately didn't cash in those. But I'd love to play more. I mean, but if I played more World Series events, that would mean that I'm not commentating, which would be not the trade-off that I would be looking to make.
Not GTO, as they.
That's not the trade-off I want. But I mean, yeah, I mean, I love tournaments, and you know, maybe there'll come a point where I can play more. I don't know. I mean, I genuinely think, and maybe I'm, you know, being naive, but I genuinely think that if I played tournaments full time, I could be very successful.
Well, that's a good. No, it's very important to have that confidence, even in today's, you know, day and age when everyone is so improved. But you know, obviously, you've got years and years and years of experience under your belt. And obviously, because of those years of experience, as well as your high profile in the poker world, it kind of makes me wonder, do you ever feel like you have a target on your back when you're sitting at the table?
It's funny when I'm playing. Probably one of my best strengths as a poker player is understanding how I'm perceived and making adjustments accordingly. It's really important to, when you sit down at the table, to kind of like figure out how the other players at the table view you. I have heard so many times from my students and from people, they say, I didn't play a hand for an hour and the guy's still, and I'm like, who cares what you think you did? It doesn't make a difference what you did. What the reality is doesn't make a difference. It's how you are perceived that matters. Right. So oftentimes, so I have to try to figure out very quickly, like, okay, how am I perceived at the table? Is it a case of, he's not a poker player, he's a commentator. Oh, he's a crazy poker player. I know him from LA. Right. I want to bluff Tuchman. Oh, I want to stay out of his way. So, very quickly that's part of the game, trying to figure out how you are perceived and then make those adjustments accordingly. But, to answer your question, yes, sometimes I definitely have a target on my back. Or right in my front, to be honest. People aren't that shy about it. Sometimes you can very much tell that this guy is out to get you, and not a personal thing. It's just like, I want to beat him in a hand. Sure, it's fun, especially someone you know. Yeah, like, hey, I beat Tuchman. Right, whatever it might be. Yeah, and it's just and then obviously if I know that, I can make the adjustments accordingly. And sometimes, if I think somebody is out to bluff me, great, I'm going to give you enough rope to hang yourself. Sure. And I could make those adjustments, going forward. Sure. Well, you said you've been playing poker basically since you were a kid. I imagine that, that carried on through college. When you weren't playing poker, you studied at Hamilton College, at SUNY Albany. You studied journalism, creative writing, theater, philosophy, and then you studied screenwriting at UCLA. Your career path has certainly fallen in line with that liberal arts background. But I noticed one other thing during my research. You also studied biology. How does that fit into the picture? It doesn't. Honestly, I think our schooling system is absolutely, effed. I think it's just awful. I know I'm being serious. It's just, and by the way, I love that word, but I'm trying to be respectful for your podcast. Thank you. But anyway, I think it's just, here in the States, especially where I'm from, North Shore of Long Island, there's just this you go to school, you go to high school, and it wasn't a question of like, where are you going to college? It wasn't a question of if you're going to college. It was where you're going to college. Mm-hmm. There's just this okay, you're going to college right out of school. And frankly, I wasn't ready. And I think like a lot of young people, 17, 18 years old, they just don't know what they want to do. So when I went to college, when I went to Hamilton College at first, they were asking me what you wanted to study, what kind of classes you wanted to take, what do you want to major in? What do you want to do with the rest of your life? And I was like, I don't know. So, the only advice I got was like, I'll take courses that interest you. Okay. And I always liked biology. So I liked biology and I thought philosophy was interesting. So I started taking courses in those. And then at some point I kind of, I had enough credits in biology that it seemed kind of silly not to at least get some sort of a degree in it. But as you rattled off all of my studies, you'll see how genuinely worthless most of them are. But yeah, no, I'm a big believer, just to go off on a tangent, which I always do my own thing. I am a big believer in, I think for some children, for some kids, when they turn 17 or 18 years old, they are absolutely mature enough and ready to go to college. Mm-hmm. I think for other kids like me, I think it would have been very beneficial to take a year or 3 to kind of figure out some things, maybe get a job, maybe grow up a little bit, and then go to school when I would say 20 or 21. Mm-hmm. Not wait that long, because I still want to experience what college is all about. But you can, at 21, you can still very much experience college. And I feel like at that point, I might have actually gone to school for broadcast journalism. Not so, maybe I would have gone to, Syracuse and tried to get into school in Newhouse. Right. Which is certainly one of the better, maybe I would have actually pursued that because I would have known. Uh-huh. I wish there was a good story about biology, except the fact that, I liked it and I thought it was cool. And what I was going to end up doing with it, I had no idea. I didn't think I wanted to be a doctor, but the idea of maybe like doing like biological lab work and research interested me a little bit. Mm-hmm. So
Right. Well, you did say philosophy is worthless, but it was interesting hearing your tangent and sort of philosophizing on what people should be doing straight out of high school. Very interesting insights there from you. You mentioned that, and obviously you're born in New York. You referenced the Catskills, and you studied in Albany, but you also lived in London for a while, and of course you're in Los Angeles right now, and obviously you're traveling all over the world for work. But what's guided you in terms of where you've chosen to live over the years?
It's funny. I don't know if what's guided me as much as, my sense of adventure and my inability to stay still, even here while I'm doing a podcast with you. I am the only reason I am not walking back more than I'm walking back and forth as I am is because I've got a cord and a mic in my ear, so I can only go so far. But I am walking around my office with this on because I can't sit still. But that kind of I guess restlessness in some ways. My wife and I have this lovely house that we bought here in Pasadena. And even now, we've been here for we only moved in a year and a half ago. I'm like, where else can we move to? You know what I mean? The idea of owning and living in a home for 20 years is what? It's just so bizarre to me. I mean, we may end up doing it. Who knows? Because of stability and stuff and jobs. But it's So, yeah, I think so. It's my sense of adventure and always trying new things and checking out new places. I was dating a girl. London happened, New York to LA was not all that big a deal. I was in New York after college and not doing anything really, crazy. I was playing a little bit of poker for fun. I was doing some theater. I had a job bartending. And I was just like, you know what? I want to go out to LA. I had been dating a girl from LA. But we had broken up, but I was really close to her family. So I was like, I'll go out there for a few months and see what it's like,
Mm-hmm.
And I went out to LA and, 3 months turned into 3 years. And, before you knew it, LA was my life. And I ended up getting married. I got divorced and then met a girl from London.
Mm-hmm.
And then we were kind of together and we were hanging out. We were trying to figure out, okay, how can we make this work? We were having these romantic rendezvous in New York. She was living in London. I was living in LA. So we would meet in Boston. We'd meet in New York. We realized that that's not sustainable over the long term. So we were trying to figure out, okay, do you want to move to LA or do I move to London? She was having a lot of trouble getting a visa and getting any work out here. And I put some feelers out in London and I was already in poker a little bit. So I had some contacts and I had done the Full Tilt $1 million cash game already. Anyway, a director from that referred me to a director at Sky, and I ended up getting some work in London. And the second I got the work, to me, it was like a no-brainer. I was like, yeah, this sounds like an amazing adventure. I want to go live in London, and I can see Europe, right. And I tell anybody who listens, I try to tell my nieces and my nephews this, and I'll tell my kids when they get older, travel.
Yep.
See the world. If you want to, open your eyes and get a different perspective. I always think of the movie Dead Poet Society.
Oh,
when they say
movie. Love that.
Yeah, it's just an amazing movie, and the message it tells, there's some parts about it that are just great. And when Robin Williams tells them to stand on the tables to get a different perspective of life, I think travel is kind of the equivalent to that. Yep. And you meet different people and you see different ways people are living, and it just really opens your eyes to how the world works and how you fit in that world.
Right.
So I feel really blessed. Yeah. And then, being in London for a long time, my girlfriend and I up there broke up and I was single and having a good time. And I kind of realized if I stay out here, I'm probably going to meet somebody. I'm going to be out in London forever. And, I'm an American boy at heart. I like going into a sports bar at 9:00 and watching a game. And that's just not really that's not really how things work in London. And the weather was just atrocious. And, I guess I was just like, I miss LA. I'm going to come back here. And then nice. I came back here. I met a girl, and the rest is history. I'm here.
So basically, following the girl, right? That's a very long way of saying I've been following the girl and following my heart, and I am never against. If somebody called me tomorrow and said, "Tuchman, I've got this great opportunity for you in Sydney, Dubai. Australia." Okay.
Or wherever it might be. I mean, I don't care. I'd be like, yeah, let's go.
Awesome.
In fact, a really quick funny story. I had moved back here and I was covering the NFL, obviously American football in London for Sky Sports for many years. And I still had a lot of contacts there, but I was still covering the games that were played in London. You know, they play like 2 or 3 games each year there.
Sure.
So I was still going out there. Anyway, my executive producer for the NFL called me up and said, Tuck, what would it take for you to move back and take over the lead job? There was a great guy named Kevin Cadle who recently passed away, who was the lead anchor for the NFL. And they were thinking about possibly retiring him. And he was, you know, and they're saying, Tuck, what would it take you to move out here? And I was like, oh, man, I was like, you know, if you had asked me this a year ago, this is the job I wanted, you know?
Right.
But, you know, now I've got a young kid. At this point, my first child was really, really young. He was like 1. You know, my wife and I owned a house. I was like, you know, it was just much more complicated.
Sure.
But even then, I went and talked to my wife about this, and she was like, let's do it. So then I think we kind of made this choice. We're like, okay. I said to her, hey, where wouldn't you move to? And instead of making a where would we move to list, because we were like, there's too many places we would move to, right, you know, at the drop of a dime, it became a where would we not move to list.
Wow.
And we put like 5 things on the list of places we would end up we were like not comfortable. We don't want to move there. That's not our vibe. But like I said, I mean, somebody called me tomorrow and said, hey, Tuck, I've got an opportunity for you in Vancouver. I think my wife and I would have no problem moving and be thrilled.
Well, that's a fabulous answer. Oh, Captain, my captain. We'll get the little reference there to the dead.
I like that. Well played.
Well, LA is, of course, a poker mecca, and obviously you're playing, and cash game's still the bread and butter. Where's your favorite room to play?
Probably the bike in LA. It's closest
because of work
to me.
Considerations.
It's just close. I mean, you're talking about favorite room in LA, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Commerce and I have never. It's, you know, Savage is going to be mad at me for this, but the cash game, it's just a warehouse. It's just not a nice room. It's really loud. The chairs are close together, you know, and it's just like, because it's so big. I mean, the action is there, everything,
right?
But it's so big, you're just constantly hearing like, you know, GQ to table 40, and then they just keep going, and it's so annoying.
Right. The bike isn't exactly small.
No, it's not, but it's small enough because I play in the top section.
Sure.
And, you know, so it's a little bit, you know, it's a little bit off the side. The tables are a little further apart. You know, maybe it's just 'cause familiarity. I mean, I've been there so long, you know, and I've been playing there. Hawaiian Gardens is really nice. They built a great room down at the Hawaiian Gardens, but it's a little bit further for me. It's about 15 minutes further. And in LA, you know, obviously that's a consideration.
Sure.
I was working
at like an hour and a half, right?
Yeah, I was hosting at Hustler for a little bit. But you know, that didn't work out. That all worked out fine. But depending on what I'm doing, though, Hustlers is a nice room as well. I don't mind playing there also. Right. I mean, really, any of those rooms. Hollywood Park actually built a nice room too. But that's just, again, that's a little bit further away from me. Right. Sometimes I will literally base it off of what I'm doing that day and where I am.
Sure. So convenience and aesthetics. It makes sense.
100%. But generally, I mean, I'll play at any of the big 5 casinos here.
Right.
And
they're
more.
all fantastic. I've also played at them as well.
I mean, Hollywood Park did a really nice job. The remodel there is lovely. Yep,
absolutely. It's just $10 for valet instead of $5 like everywhere else. So that's what it is.
Right. You can usually get that comp though. I mean, like the bike is $5, but you get that comp too if you play.
Sure. Well, that's an experienced grinder. Talking there. I just only visited myself though. So you mentioned family and family considerations. You know, a lot of players as well as industry folks like yourself have been around for a while. Many of them in their 30s, their 40s. They got married, have kids. You got a couple kids. I met one of them. I think I met Silas, right, a couple years ago. And how do you balance the professional commitments with the family commitments?
It's hard. I'm not going to lie. It's really hard. You know, I think whether you're a poker player or you do what I do, which is poker player / other things in the business. Right. Yeah, that's hard. I would imagine it's difficult for almost any profession, depending on how many hours you put in. When I compare it to like people that have other jobs that wake up at 6:30 in the morning or out of the house by 7:15, they don't really get home until 6:30, 7 at night. Yep. I mean, that's hard too.
That's the truth. Yep.
Yeah. So I don't know if being in the poker business is unique to that. Okay. I feel like balancing your professional life and your personal life and your family life is a very difficult kind of line to toe.
Right.
And I think you just have to remember, my grandfather used to tell me this, and he certainly didn't make it up, but he just said, remember why you work.
Well,
It's
old world wisdom, but obviously still true. That's a good one.
Yeah, just like you remember why you work, remember what's important, and my family comes first and second and third and fourth. and I'm really lucky that I love my job and I want to do my job. And I don't want to ever be in a position where I have to choose one or the other,
Sure. Would you say that your attitude towards your work has changed a little bit since becoming a father, though?
It's easier. I would say that tough days are easier to deal with when you're coming home to, just love.
Oh, where's my heart emoji?
Seriously.
That's a beautiful one. I love that.
No, it's like, right. I talked to Danielle Moon about this, and she was just like, somebody asked this question to her, and her answer was the best. Somebody said, how do you balance family, kids with poker? And she said, I went to the casino and I got my ass beat, and I come home to my family, my, wonderful husband and my son. And then I think, how do you not do it? How do you play poker and not have that? And I feel the same way. I'm like doing this or doing really anything without that would be very empty. So if anything, I think they really help. Traveling has become more difficult now. As I said, I mean, if you're traveling, whether you're a tournament grinder, which I'm not, but whether you're a tournament grinder or whether you travel like I do for broadcasting, that has become more difficult because my oldest son is 5.
Sure.
And a few weeks ago, when we were kind of preparing him for my inevitable trek around the world and a lot of time away from home over a few weeks, I kept telling him, and he just looked at me one morning and he goes, Daddy, and with his sweet little brown eyes, he just goes, Daddy, can you get a job that's closer to home so we can play more? And yeah, my wife looked at me with a little smirk on her face and she goes, your heartbreak? And I'm like, yeah. It's just like, that's heartbreak. And when I come home from a long trip or whatever it might be, my 5-year-old's extra clingy. Like, I don't understand how people in the military do it. That's just insane. All the respect in the world to them. I don't know how you can leave your kids for that long. It's just unreal.
Right. For sure. Well, that definitely takes a special kind of personality to do that. And look, it's important and good to hear that you got your priorities on right. And it's as all of us age and get into our family years, it's good to hear from a good representative example.
I do think. It's funny, Robbie. I've heard people say that it's really hard to be a poker player and be a family man and stay married, which is why maybe that's one of the reasons why you see a lot of older poker players, divorced and single.
Yep.
And I think the newer generation, in all fairness, I think, we've evolved as poker players. We don't play in back rooms anymore and have to bring a gun and worry. I'm not saying that doesn't exist anymore, but I feel like in many ways the poker world has evolved. We have become a more credible, serious business that is actually something I'm quite proud to be part of. I mean, we have some of the most intelligent people in society playing poker.
Yep.
It's no longer just, it's just a bunch of gamblers, And I think with that also, I think a lot of these people have gotten smarter. I just saw Jason Kuhn in Montenegro, and he's getting married and talking about possibly starting a family soon. And you see Jason Mercier down in Florida with his lovely wife,
sure.
their boy, and then of course they have another one on the way. And it just, I feel like this generation of poker players is far more likely to stay married or at least be along the same whatever the percentages of marriages that stay together across the board. I think it's more likely to be on par with that than what poker players were 25, 30 years ago.
I think you're right, and I certainly hope so. It seems to be, again, to borrow the phrase from poker, much more GTO, and I think that's a very, very good thing in general for everybody. Well, obviously you've got your family stuff going on, the professional stuff going on, but your Twitter handle is Tuck on Sports. You're obviously ridiculously into sports as well. You commentate, and you're very into hockey, into football. How do you find time?
It's something I enjoy and I love. I mean, obviously your time's got to be, you're pulled in different directions, and you figure it out if you want to do it, and maybe you sleep a little bit less, or
right. That's what I was gonna say. You just don't sleep, right?
Yeah, you just sleep a little less and you figure it out. I work better when I'm really, really busy. When I have too much time in my hands, I feel like I get nothing done. When I don't have enough time in the day, I seem to get everything done somehow. Yeah, it was Tucker on Sports. Basically, I remember I was actually working with James Hardigan doing an EPT many, many years ago.
And one of our former guests here on the podcast, sure.
Yeah, I love Hardigan. He's great. And he was a big San Francisco 49er fan. He and I always talk. And he had just started a Twitter account. And I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. I'll start one too. And he was at the time Hardigan on film because he did film reviews. He's a big film buff. Mm-hmm. So I was like, and at the time I was covering poker, but I was covering NFL for Sky, and I was covering NASCAR for Sky. Okay.
Yep.
So I thought, okay, well, I cover enough sports. I'd love to cover more sports. I'll do Tuck on Sports. And it just seemed, and so it's kind of stuck as, I guess, my brand.
Right.
And I've kept it, even though I'm probably at this point 90% poker, but I still, I love hockey. I mean, I have the NHL package, and I try to watch at least, I would say I watch at least somewhere in the neighborhood of 10, 12 games a week during the season.
Uh-huh.
So I watch a ton of hockey.
That's a lot of hockey.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you can condense. They have these condensed games, and you can watch them you can watch a whole hockey game in 20 minutes.
Sure.
So that you figure out ways to do it. I used to work for Pro Football Focus, and I hosted a podcast for them. So
yep.
I love covering the NFL, and I really enjoy it. Although I feel like the game has really gotten worse. In some ways, I'm almost finding it's unwatchable. I was joking around with somebody. I said, if it wasn't for fantasy football and sports betting, would you watch an NFL game if it wasn't involving your team? And that's yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, you got mixed answers, of course. Some people are like, yeah, but I just feel like the game is I'm a little bit bored by how slow it is now. But I still love sports. I mean, I love competition. So
sure.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really watch much. My wife and I will binge watch a show once in a while. We'll watch a show together. But if I'm not watching a show with her, I'm either watching sports or nothing at all. The TV is not on. I don't really I'm not one of those people that just have the TV on all day.
Right. I get it. I mean, you're obviously watching that much hockey and that much football. I want to ask, does listening to the commentators on those games, has that influenced your own broadcasting style?
Oh, 100%. Yeah. I mean, there are some people out there that are just amazing at their craft. I feel like if you try to emulate somebody else, you'll usually fail. But I think if you take in what you like from somebody else's broadcast, and then you can listen to your own broadcast with an objective ear, you can really kind of figure out where your weaknesses are, where your strengths are, what you like about somebody else's broadcast, and see if you can kind of make it your own in many ways. But there have been some people that I have had the privilege of interviewing and talking with. Jim Nance, I remember interviewing him when I was covering football for Sky. He came out to cover one of the games, and I got to talk to him. And we got into this wonderful. I'm only upset that I didn't actually make it a podcast back then. But we had this wonderful conversation, and I kind of picked his brain on some things. And he's always been kind of somebody I've listened to and admired.
Well, that's a real legend. Sure.
Yeah, for what he's done in his work. But there are some people out there that are just amazing. I mean, Vince Scully is just living in LA.
That's a legend. The goat.
And
sure.
Yeah, and there are some people out there that are just really, really amazing at their craft, and I'd be stupid not to learn from them. And by the way, I mean, I'll even learn from people that aren't necessarily pros. I mean, there are people out there that I sit with that I learn all the day from. You know what I mean? I'm saying from amateurs that might come in the booth.
Sure.
And I'd be like,
sure.
I really like that. That's a good idea, what you just did,
Right. We'll definitely be talking about that and being in the booth and people who commentate along with you and dive more into your broadcasting career. We're going to learn more about David, this beer-loving, dog-loving, fine specimen of a man. But first, a little strategy break.
There is a common flaw both in the way poker is taught and in the way poker is thought about by students. It's a flaw that paints poker out to be a world far more black and white than it realistically is. One of the most prolific examples of this occurs regarding the way we think about our reasons for betting. Perhaps we're familiar with the idea that every time we bet in poker, it should either be for value or as a bluff. If a hand is not strong enough to bet for value, but too strong to bluff with, the best play is always to check. While this advice may translate reasonably to some situations, it breaks down significantly in others. We might even go so far as to say that the main difference between a small stakes amateur and a high stakes crusher is understanding accurately the grey area between these two extremes. Concepts such as vulnerability, protection, and denial of equity are significantly more important than the average player realizes. As a general guide, vulnerable holdings need protection. There are three general factors that make a hand or pair vulnerable. Possibility of overcards hitting on the next street, possibility of flush draws completing, and the possibility of straight draws completing. In scenarios where a hand is susceptible to being outdrawn, it should often be bet, even if we expect to be a slight underdog versus villain's calling range. This might be a difficult concept at first, since we might have been taught adamantly that we must always have 50% equity versus our opponent's calling range to justify betting. Of course, very good opponents will attempt to prevent us betting thin for protection by raising aggressively. But seeing as the average opponent doesn't raise nearly enough post-flop, protection bets should formulate a much larger component of our strategy than we might initially imagine.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Red Chip Poker Podcast. Robbie Straczynski here with one of poker's premier broadcasters and all-around great guy, David Tuchman. David, I introduced you at the top of the show as a man of many hats. And when I was preparing, and doing my research and stuff, I didn't even have to open up Wikipedia or any other sites or anything. I didn't do any research. Right off the top of my head, I listed the following companies and programs with which you've been affiliated in some capacity over the years. Live at the Bike, Crush Live Poker, 888 Poker, Under the Gun, Stones Live Poker, Poker Night in America, ESPN, the WSOP broadcasts, Poker Stars, working with Poker Productions, and most recently Triton Poker. First off, did I miss any?
Probably, but I think we got the gist though.
Right. Well, there's obviously a lot to unpack there. So, and when, we can't just go on forever on the podcast. So let's try to break it down a little bit. At what point did you first break into the industry side of poker, and with whom?
With the industry side of poker, that was with the Bike.
Mm-hmm.
I was playing poker and doing some writing in the LA area. And I found that playing poker was a really nice side gig to do with writing because the flexibility of both really worked well. And then I found out you could be a prop. I had no idea what a prop was, but they hired me to be a prop player, which essentially means you play with your own money, but they pay you to play. But you're on a schedule, and you have to play the games that they tell you to play, which means generally you're in the worst games, shorthanded, you're starting games. When a game gets good, you get up, whatever it might be. But I got paid to play poker. So that was my first gig. And from there, Live at the Bike started. And I remember Rick Cloward, who was the poker room manager at the time, coming over to me and asking me if this was something I'd be interested in doing. I was lukewarm because I was like, I'm going to lose money because I'm going to be leaving the poker table, the poker room, and not be playing. But I was like, yeah, sure, I'll give it a shot.
There, David.
Well, dude, there was no long term. I was like, it was a live stream. I mean, I was, who the heck knew where this was going to go? And I remember Bart Hansen was slated to work with it. And Bart and I were friends because we were both propping at the time at the Bike. And Bart actually studied broadcast journalism in Syracuse. And this is something that he always dreamed of doing. He really wanted this. So he was like all in 100%. He was so excited. I was somewhat lukewarm, but I was like, yeah, let's do it. So that was my first industry. That was my first time working in the poker industry, was as a prop and then commentating for Live at the Bike. And that was I started propping at the Bike in January of 2004.
Mm-hmm.
And Live at the Bike started in January of 2005.
I didn't realize it'd been around that long. Wow.
Yeah. Well, it stopped for a while and then it came back.
Right. So I guess from there, sort of one gig led to the next?
Yeah. Work begets work.
Sure.
I'm a big believer in that. If you work hard and you don't suck, you hopefully get more work. Especially in this field, in this field. This isn't something like you're not going to go on LinkedIn and find a job, doing broadcasting work.
Right.
So generally it's a director you've worked with or somebody who's seen you who thinks or a recommendation or whatever it might be, and you make more contacts and so forth and so on.
Right. So, I mean, obviously we listed all the companies you worked with, and you're putting in all the hours and obviously proving yourself over and over again. At what point in your career did it sort of change from you having to seek out more work to organizations approaching you and saying, hey, you available? Was there like a tipping point?
I don't know if it has changed. I mean, it's been both for a while.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that a lot of what I do is still, networking and staying on top of it. And I think if you get complacent in your field, whatever that field is, there's somebody younger and hungrier that will take your job.
Wow.
It's not something I sit it's not something I sit around and fear, but I think if you get complacent, then you're replaceable. Everybody is.
Wow. It's fascinating hearing that from you because you've just been around for so long,
Yeah. I mean, I have a lot of respect. I look at what Lon McCarron did.
Sure.
I think Lon, I remember having a conversation with Lon many, many years ago and him saying how he saw the live streaming coming. I was working the PCA with him. He was there working the PCA. James Hardigan was there. I was there actually working with Chad Brown, of all people, late Chad Brown. And I remember Lon was like, he did like a break desk, like a live break desk with David Williams, I think. And I think Lon was, sincerely worried that, this industry, poker, was passing him by.
Wow.
But he's such a pro at what he does. He's such a good broadcaster.
Yes.
What he was lacking was the actual poker experience. So covering it live for him was very difficult. So what did he do? He busted his ass and started playing poker. And he's putting a ton of hours. And Lon is somebody I have so much respect for as a person and also as a professional. Because, rather than let this just pass him by, he said, no, let me put the work in. Things he's great at. He's such a pro. Right. But he wanted to get better at reading the board and being able to know what questions to ask. And he did. And I think, that's a lesson that I've learned in the same way where, if you ever get to the point where you think you know everything, you're pretty much done. So while I do get approached for jobs still, I still reach out, and especially if there's a project that I think is exciting, I have no ego about reaching out and being like, hey, can I audition for this? Can I, is there something I can do to be considered for this work?
That's awesome. And I got to say, that type of attitude, of course, translates to the poker table as well. You got to keep on actively trying to get better. The moment you get complacent, everyone's just going to go ahead and pass you by. So totally understand that one. You mentioned Lon McCarron, and of course, the mainstays of poker broadcasting are well known. And I imagine, any of our listeners could go ahead and name, half a dozen easily. But we sort of alluded to this in the first part of our podcast here. There seems to be an increasing trend in the last half decade to also bring poker players into the commentary booth. Who are some of the players you've enjoyed commentating with, and why?
I mean, I felt like it was an obvious way to go. I mean, if you look at, NFL, if you look at other sports that are covered, you have a main broadcaster who generally has some sort of broadcasting education, background, experience. He's a professional broadcaster. And then you'll bring in an expert in that craft, whether it's Troy Aikman or Tony Romo or, whatever sport you're following, right?
Sure.
But in terms of who are some players that I love working with, I used to love working with Nick Schulman when I was working with him before he kind of moved on and now is exclusively with Ali. He's obviously brilliant, and we all acknowledge that. Jason Somerville, always fun to work with. He's just very easy. Jesse Sylvia is, he explains poker in a way that is very just digestible, in the sense that he doesn't dumb it down for the people that know and understand what he's saying, but he also doesn't talk at a level where the beginner feels alienated. And I think that's important. Jamie Kerstetter as well will bring some strategy in there, and then she also brings a lot of humor, and I'm looking forward to working with her this summer. So, there's so many to name. Brian Rast is great. With Max Steinberg back in the day.
Right.
So there's so many.
Yeah, a lot of very highly talented players who also know how to get on the mic. It's I certainly enjoy listening to them. But you did touch upon this actually in your answer, and that sort of leads into my next question here. An issue that obviously comes up amongst players is, of course, the game has progressed and everyone's improved and gotten so much better. By the same token, you take a poker broadcast, whether it's a live stream or even an edited show from, 2019 and compare it to something from 2011 or, obviously 2003, 2004, the commentary has gotten so much more sophisticated as well. You're bringing in, these expert players, they do hand analysis and, like you said, it's a natural progression. It makes sense. But I'm wondering though, is, when we keep on doing this sort of thing, this natural progression, does that potentially, in your opinion, cause some fans maybe to lose interest, or maybe the game becomes even a little bit more closed off to new fans who would potentially take an interest?
Well, that's our job. Our job, if that's happening, then we're not doing our job well, generally speaking. And generally, those are not the broadcasters that should be working. It is hugely important to continue to advance our commentary and make it more interesting and make it more educational and entertain without alienating new viewers. And if we're doing that, then we're not doing our job. As far as I'm concerned, what we should be doing is, if you watch an NFL broadcast and the best broadcasters out there are explaining very complex things in a very simple manner. And that's what's important, obviously, for poker, because, poker is in of itself, it's a pretty simple game, right? But I think it's really important to, you can't dumb it down. You've got to make it, you have to, really try to explain the intricacies of the game and the nuances of the game, but at the same time, also kind of keep it approachable because, it's a tough line to toe, to use that phrase once again, but I think that's what our job is. Yeah, and there are some commentators out there. There are some poker players out there that I think, go too far with strategy. And I am a big proponent of, when you're listening to a broadcast, whether it's the World Series of Poker or any live stream, it's not an educational video. If you want a training video, there are training videos out there. Plenty of great sites, including one that I work for, crushlivepoker.com. There's great videos out there that are specifically training videos. When you turn on a live stream, it shouldn't be a training video. You don't watch the NFL. It's not oh, cool, I can go coach now. But it gives you a little bit of flavor of what goes into game planning. It gives you a little bit of flavor into what goes into making decisions at the poker table, And that's what it should be.
Yeah.
So, I think the strategy and insight into how players are thinking and what they're thinking is really important, because otherwise it's boring. But, at the end of the day, it's a show. It's entertainment, right?
Yep. Yeah.
And we can't forget
not to lose sight of that. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's exactly true.
Yeah. Well, obviously, someone who looks from the outside, everywhere I go, I say, "Oh, David Tuchman's commentating here. He's commentating there." You seem to have a lot of different jobs that you're always juggling. Do you ever have a potential, maybe a conflict that two organizations need you at exactly the same time? And if that's ever happened, how do you choose? Is it who pays more, or you don't want to ruin any sort of relationships?
Yeah, without getting into contracts and stuff like that.
Oh, of course.
There have been, there definitely have been conflicts, and generally it's not a matter of who's paying more. It's usually just a matter of who's hired me first.
Okay.
If I have committed to a project, then I'm committed. I'm like you mentioned earlier, I love dogs. I am loyal like a dog. So if I have committed to a project, then I'm committed. And if somebody else comes forward and goes, "Tuck, I want you to do this, though I'll pay you twice," be like, "Listen, thank you. I'm flattered. That's wonderful. Maybe next year."
Right.
I'm busy this year. I'm busy for this particular time.
Right.
So I feel like it's very important if you agree to do something, then you follow through with that.
Sure, of course. How far in advance do you plan out your schedule? There's obviously always, every week another poker tournament. How far in the future are you always looking?
It depends. Honestly, it depends on the clients, and then whoever I'm doing work for. Sometimes it's, many months in advance. and sometimes it's weeks.
Hmm.
You just never know. Like the World Series obviously has been a stable gig for me for many years.
Sure.
But even then, I usually don't get the call until like February, March, or sometimes even April to say, okay, we're doing it. Let's go ahead. So it's something that like my wife and I planned for, but you never know. And in fact, a couple of years ago, when PokerGo took over and they transitioned me, they kind of had a little bit of a juggling. Lon McCarron did some live streams. Ollie did a lot of live streams, but Lon did most of them. And they put me on the break desk.
Right.
And it was, it was a different hat to wear for me and a different role. And I really enjoyed it. And I think it taught me a lot. That was like, it's like early April and I'm talking to people at the World Series and they were like, yeah, PokerGo took over. So they're deciding what to do. And at that point I was like, yeah. And I told my wife, I was like, I don't think I'm doing it this year. She's like, really? I'm like, yeah. So we went ahead and bought concert tickets.
Oh my goodness.
For the summer. And then of course the next day I got the call.
Oh goodness.
To do the break desk. So, sometimes
and you're
it's like that.
Sorry, I'm committed to the concert, right? Because they went.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I was like, sorry, dude, I've got to do this. But yeah, I think it's just, it is like I said, and sometimes it's weeks, but, and with other jobs, obviously, way in advance. Like I knew about Barcelona where I'm going next week for 888. Oh, I'm dating myself. I know this is not going to be. Barcelona is always late May, early June for 888 poker. So that's kind of on the schedule for quite some time. So.
Okay. Well, when you're doing a live stream commentary, there's, by definition, a limited amount that you could possibly prepare. But obviously, you do have to do some sort of prep. About how much time do you put in, to each gig before, the red light goes on?
About 20 seconds. No, I'm kidding. I try to, it depends what kind of live stream it is. It depends if it's a final table where the participants have been determined by the day before. Like, let's say I covered a couple of WPT final tables where the final table is established the night before. Well, at that point, I can do a ton of research on all the players, get to know what's going on, who they are. And in that case, I might put in 6, 7, 8 hours of prep for that final table.
Wow. That's a lot.
Well, if I know in advance, you know what I mean? If the WPT is down to their final 6 at 5 p.m. on Wednesday and the final table starts the next day at 4 p.m., yeah, I've got plenty of time to kind of put some work in and really, get to know the 6 players that are left.
Sure.
Now, other times, obviously, the final table is determined and then we're live, 21 minutes later. Right. And in those cases, obviously, I'm a lot more limited in how much actual prep I can do on those players. And sometimes also, by the way, they'll change a table also in the middle. There have been times where, if I'm covering nowadays, it's not just final tables. We're covering days 1 and day 2 of tournaments as well, where sometimes I get a new player in there right away. While I'm doing a live stream. So you can't really prepare there. So what I will prepare for is, obviously if I'm in a location, I want to know as much about that particular spot as I can. If we're doing a tournament, I want to know as much about that particular tournament. I would say it ranges though from prep work. I would say from probably anywhere from an hour to 5 hours.
Sure. You mentioned, Vin Scully before, and, that's one of the amazing things that I always remember listening to him, called Dodger Baseball. I'm also an LA boy. He was able to fill time with, all manner of knowledge and, do so in not some sort of in a bullshitty kind of way. He was just a fountain of knowledge. And I guess, putting in that prep work when you don't know what to expect or when there's any sort of lull, that definitely helps you follow in Mr. Scully's footsteps.
Yeah. Far behind his footsteps, obviously. He's a legend. But yeah, I think there are some parallels to doing poker broadcasting as there are in baseball. Because there are so many lulls in the action, especially, tell me what you do. Imagine you were the play-by-play guy for the Baltimore Orioles.
Okay.
They were eliminated like a month ago, basically, right? It's May, There's like 4 months left in the season, Nobody is he's going to have to come up with some great stuff, It's like there's no pennant race. There's no exciting baseball to be played. There's no game they have no meaningful games left unless you bet on them as I have or bet against them as I have. But, for him, that's his job. So I feel like that's really important. Something that really prepared me for those times as well, when I was covering NASCAR, there were rain delays. And when we have a rain delay,
right,
basically we would end up having to fill. It's called fill. Mm-hmm. And we would be like, my producer would be like, okay, guys, we've got to fill. And it's not a matter of like, oh, how long is the fill? We don't know. There's a rain delay.
Right.
And until the race either goes back on or they cancel the race and call it back for the next day, we're there. And there have been times where we've had, 2-hour rain delays. Wow. And it's like, okay, Phil, go. Wow. And it's like, okay, what are we going to talk about for 2 hours? There's not even a race going on right now. We can talk about next week's race. We can talk about last week's race. We can talk about stories. So I think that's a very important thing. I will say for, any time that there's a saying where, for every hour you're on the air, you're probably preparing 3 hours. Mm-hmm. And I think that holds true. And when I covered NASCAR and when I covered NFL, and if I cover poker tournaments where there's like an long theme, like the World Series of Poker, okay, I will put in a ton of hours. Like, for example, like I have the World Series of Poker media guide on my iPad. I will read it in its entirety, and I will take notes on it so that when we get the inevitable lull, if something happens and we need to fill 20 minutes, I have something.
That's amazing. That's a brilliant tactic too. I mean, and for those who don't know, this media guide is like 100 pages long at least. It's really tons of information in there.
It's not an exciting read, but I'm just saying, when preparing, like I can't prepare for the players. I don't know who's going to be at the table, but what I can do is prepare as much as possible. Like, to be honest with you, I got home and before we were doing our podcast, I was, looking at Daniel Negreanu's, divorce from PokerStars. And, so I was listening to I was reading his prepare. I was watching the video, and I think in the poker world, or if you're covering, no matter what you're covering, if you're covering chess like Jen Shahade does, mm-hmm, or you're covering the NFL or NASCAR or poker, the more you know about that world, the better prepared you will be to fill when that time comes.
Right. So you just got to stay up to date with, all the news going on and be that fountain of knowledge. And I've heard it, throughout our conversation. You clearly have a very firm grasp on everything that's going on everywhere in the poker world. And I got to say, you're in a pretty sweet spot at this point in your career. You're an independent contractor. You got that freedom. You travel all over the world. You got your eggs diversified in a number of baskets. Are there any dream gigs that you covet and maybe hope to get someday?
In poker or out of poker?
Go for both.
I mean, in poker, covering the World Series of Poker main event was something I've done it. So I don't know if it's a dream. I did it back in 2011 and I had so much fun doing it. I feel like my broadcasting abilities have improved tenfold since then. So I would love to at some point get another chance doing that. This is in no way saying that, Lon isn't deserving in doing it, or, other broadcasters that are fantastic at it, But, the World Series of Poker main event is the, creme de la creme.
Sure.
It is what it is. Is that a gig I would love? Yeah, of course. But I like I said, I've done it. But if I was really thinking of a dream gig, it would probably be outside of poker, and it would probably be covering like hockey, NHL, like whether it be like the Winter Olympics hockey, mm-hmm, or whether it be, just the NHL. In general.
Islanders? I know you're a big Islander.
I mean, I am a big Islander fan, but I mean, I would love to cover, any NHL team. That would be a dream, that would be something I would move in a heartbeat. Like if the new expansion team in Seattle hired me, and I'll put this out there, guys, if anybody has but if the new Seattle team in new hockey team in the NHL in Seattle, if they hired me as their play-by-play guy, we'd move to Seattle tomorrow.
Right.
You know what I mean? And by the way, I would take a pay cut.
Ooh, wow.
You know what I mean?
You want it that badly.
That would be just a dream job. It would just be, and for me, from earlier, I can't sit still, new experiences, new fun bridges to cross, mm-hmm, are just, that excites me. Wow. That keeps me going. So, yeah, I think that would be a lot of fun. I would love to cover. I've covered NFL. I've covered NASCAR. Hockey is my love. It's the game I love playing. I grew up playing it. I still play it. Yet it's the one sport I have never actually covered. So I would love to.
Amazing. Well, I certainly hope for you to achieve those sorts of dreams. But as a poker purist, a poker fan, I hope poker never loses you, David. And I got to ask, before we're about to check out here, how can our listeners reach you if they have some more questions, or maybe you got something you'd like to promote before we go?
Nothing really to promote. I mean, I'm going to be in Barcelona for. You can always follow me on the 888 Poker Tour. I'm going to be, of course, this summer at the World Series of Poker, which is going to be awesome. If you want to get a hold of me, best way to do it is on Twitter. I am fairly active there. I mean, I'm on all social media, but I don't really follow any other ones. But Twitter is the one place where you can definitely get a hold of me. I do my best to answer every single tweet, as long as it's obviously a reasonable question. And I'm at Tuchman Sports, so pretty easy to get a hold of me.
Awesome. That's a Tuck, right? Not.
Yes. It is I spelled it the way you would say it, rather than the way you would, because my last name's obviously Tuch, but then you'd be going Tush on Sports, which isn't nearly as catchy as Tuck on Sports.
And on that note, that is David Tuchman, everybody. And I hope you've enjoyed learning about him as much as I have. I'm your host, Robbie Straczynski, and you've been listening to the Red Chip Poker Podcast.
Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode. But don't stop learning now. Head over to redchippoker.com. You'll find everything you need to get better today. Join our free, friendly strategy group and start talking poker with our coaches and community. And listen, if you're ready to take poker more seriously, sign up for Core, our $5 a week complete training platform built for players who have limited time to study. Core is packed with over 100 bite-sized lessons, from the fundamentals to advanced strategies, quizzes, achievements, discussion threads, and more. And for the bravest of heart, we invite you to check out our Pro membership, which includes 24/7 access to hundreds of videos, all of our playlists, all of our crash courses, and more. If you want to see what the top 1% of players are studying to keep their edges razor sharp, visit redchippoker.com/Ruby. That's RUBY, and get a special deal on your first 3 weeks. Until next time, run good, play better, and get there.